This week, Emmet and I discuss Ghost Band, written by Critiquing Comics regular co-host Jason McNamara, with art by Vincent Gladnick and a host of others. It's a story about moving on from a place where you used to live that's changed drastically, along with some satirical elements, including pokes at Silicon Valley's promises that technology will always make our lives better. In the second half, Jason himself joins me to talk about the making of that book, and then we go on to discuss Grimm's Assistant by Nigerians Mamode Ogbewele and Chigozie Amadi, about an enigmatic alliance between the Grim Reaper and a university student who works as a kind of apprentice to the Reaper. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for helping to keep the show going. You can pitch in by pledging at least $2 a month at patreon.com/deconcomics. This is Tim.
This is Emmet.
This is Jason.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo with Emmet in Australia. Gee, dang.
Keep it simple, man. That's fine. I am in Australia.
He's in the land down under.
That is where I am.
I've been so smooth on it the last several times, and then this time I just totally, my brain just like, what are you doing?
You did well.
Right, Australia. So this episode is going to be kind of a Deconstructing Comics with Critiquing Comics format. Jason's going to be on in the second half to talk about a different book, but also to talk about the book that we're going to talk about because he wrote it. This is Ghost Band, which he put out several years ago. I had gotten around to reading it before, and so he said, "Here, let me send it to you." And so I thought, well, let's talk about it on the show.
Yeah, grand.
And of course, Jason has talked about some of his past books on the show over the years. He wrote this. Much of it is drawn by Vincent Gladnick. In the second half of the show, I want to ask him about this because apparently something went off the rails about 2/3 of the way through, and maybe Vincent Gladnick couldn't finish drawing the book. And so the last part of it is a number of other artists.
Certainly. And I think he addresses this in the afterword. He sort of makes reference to some of these issues, whatever they may be. And this is not uncommon in indie comics. But I remember the bad old days of 90s Marvel comics when you'd be reading an issue of Generation X, and usually annuals. It happened to annuals a lot, and all of a sudden the art would just change. And a lot of that is due to the pressures of deadlines. But with indie comics, a lot of times, you're marshalling the efforts yourself as a creator to get this book to market, get it on shelves, and sometimes things go awry. And, I think it's a perfectly natural question to ask, but it was certainly interesting reading the book and going from this style of art that reminded me, slightly of Why the Last Man, a sort of clear, not quite clear line, but almost, and then shifting into these different styles of art all of a sudden in this almost collage effect. And it was sort of maybe sit up, certainly. Oh, what's happened?
Well, yeah, I found the first time I read it, I found it a little frustrating because I had to keep relearning what all the characters looked like because each artist drew them a little differently. Like, okay, that's that guy. Okay, but now he looks a little more like this. Okay.
Yeah.
But reading it again, somehow it had become easier, and I kind of absorbed what the characters looked like, and I could recognize them drawn by whichever artist. Briefly, just what is this book? Well, it's a post-apocalyptic story. Since it's Jason, there is some humor in it, which I liked that. And our two main characters are Sven and Johanna, who at first were led to believe they might be Swedish, but no, they're from Portland, Oregon.
We can't hear accents in dialogue balloons.
No. And so in this post-apocalyptic world, they've been traveling by sailboat for a while, I guess just down the Pacific coast, and they end up in San Francisco. And most of the people in this world have apparently been absorbed by some kind of a satellite that's operated by some tech bros. Who supposedly they're collecting everybody for some future utopian world. I could tell this seemed to be like tech bros in general always promising us, a great new world is right around the corner as we just keep doing more technology, and felt like some skepticism about that idea expressed in this book.
It does sort of remind me of our present moment. I mean, you can look at it as an allegory because you have this industry which is all about consuming as much resources as possible for them to get their next product out the door. But they'll say, oh yeah, don't worry about that. We're going to take all your water. We're going to take all your metal. We're going to do all of this stuff. But we're going to come up with a solution for climate change. Don't worry about that. We're going to figure it out. And take our word for it. So some of those people who are making those claims in the book, I'm not sure if they are directly responsible for the digital virus that's consuming people through devices, but I'm sure they would like to claim they have the answer. Like, oh no, we've seen the future and we've figured it out. We've cracked the code.
So most of the people on this earth have been absorbed like that, and the remaining ones have been kind of herded into San Francisco, which, it's not really an operational town anymore. It's just some people there living kind of a communal lifestyle, getting it on with each other whenever they want to, wherever they want to. But it has a bit of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery thrown in. So it's not all fun times.
Yeah, if you're not cool, you get hit and you get bricked in the head.
Right. And then thrown in the ocean with your hands tied behind your back. Then Johanna gets into a relationship with this guy, Alex, and they're both musicians, and they get some other musicians together. And so they've been told they have this deadline that they're all going to be absorbed anyway. And so they're thinking they're going to go out playing music. And so they are the ghost band in this story. But there's, a little more to it than that, but that's basic outline.
Yeah, what if a jam sesh was the apocalypse log for our world? Because they leave a recording behind, and that's the sort of enigmatic ending to the comic. Did you ever see the movie? I'm sure I brought it to you before. Pontypool. Ever seen that movie?
No, I feel like this has been brought up recently, but.
Might have been by me, but Pontypool is sort of a riff on the zombie genre. It's based on a book which is quite different, very strange book, but the basic premise of the story is that the virus that causes people to act out and start killing other people is spread by language, and it's such a neat little idea, and one of the characters realizes what's happening, and his solution, his way to make himself immune, is to start speaking in French, because the virus is contained within the English language. So he just starts speaking in French to try and evade the virus. I really like the movie, but it also ends on this note, this very oblique scene between the star of the movie and his real life wife. And the first time I saw the movie, I was like, what was that about? Because it's just the scene. Like, it changes the genre of the film. It goes black and white. And all of a sudden, the characters are talking in a different way. They're behaving in a different way. It makes no sense. And I read a theory afterwards, and I really like this. I've sort of taken it on, that the point of the scene is to inoculate you, the viewer, from being infected yourself. So it's meant to create a sort of distraction for your brain. And it's certainly what they're doing. That's what they're trying to do. But it's all within the movie. It serves as that for us. And there was for some reason I was reminded of that when I got to that final page, because it was just that little idea of this apocalypse drive that all these characters have. The world is ending, so let's do this thing. Let's go out in one last hurrah. And then there's this sense of, well, did it end? Because somebody might be still around.
Yeah, somebody seems to be existing in that world again, or still. I was interested in Jason's little essay at the end that he had been living in San Francisco before until I want to say roughly 2015 that he moved to Portland, but he felt like he felt like he hadn't kind of mentally or emotionally moved on from his Bay Area period. And this book seemed to be kind of exercising those ghosts for him. Is what I picked up from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just tech bros that are the target of this book, sort of satirical target of this book. And largely what I've heard, I've never been to the States, as you know. I've never been to San Francisco. Always wanted to go. And when I was younger, and now I feel like that moment's gone. Like, the San Francisco that I was told about doesn't exist anymore. And one of the reasons for that is, I've told, reportedly, is because these tech bro types have basically turned the city into their little back garden for their Silicon Valley industries. Mm-hmm. And, so they're sort of in the line of fire of this book. But you also have the sort of hipster culture that sort of was let's say, a derivative of the previous hippie movements that were sort of coalescing around San Fran decades ago, and sort of gave it that reputation of the city of love, And these people are sort of represented in the group we meet at the beginning of the story, who, as you were saying, there's this sort of free love ethos, but it's very by rote almost. And the idea of just killing anybody who isn't cool. There is a bit of a jab there, you have to be interesting, you have to be always on, you have to perform, you have to perform for our entertainment. Perhaps that's not what intended, but I took it to be a piss take of hipster performativity,
or like cliquishness.
Yeah, exactly. We're all individuals. We're all individuals, everyone says in concert,
So we all have to be individuals in the same way.
Same way, yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I'm not big on post-apocalyptic stories, and Lord knows we've been sent enough of them for critiquing comics. But I thought this was interesting. And like I said, a little humor always makes me like something more.
Well, there's certainly a lot. There's pathos to it as well, because you've got the
it's not a comedy.
The music scene where they do they perform on cardboard instruments because it's too risky to play electric instruments. Mm. That's a lovely little scene. That's it starts where you're going, oh no, this guy's insane. But then you realize what they're doing, and it's like, oh, actually, that's...
Yeah, well, I guess you can't play any wrong notes that way.
But, to commit to the role play, you say, oh, no, you hit the wrong note. No, it's okay, I like it. It adds tension, discord.
Right, I guess that does happen, yeah. Mm.
So, yeah, I liked moments like that, which just sort of lifted us up above. I hear what you're saying. There are a glut of post-apocalyptic comics. I mean, I mentioned Y the Last Man at the beginning.
And that's many
sort
of them are
really,
super serious.
Yeah, and don't actually have a lot to say.
Right.
For all their seriousness, for all their vaunted, oh, we're going to get hard and real. It's like, no, you got nothing to say. That's why I like, I know I keep talking about movies in this podcast, but that's why I like Pontypool so much, because it's very funny. It's scary. It's disturbing. It's weird. It's very funny. Mm. So that's my speed. Oh, going back to my recurring bit from my interview with Pidge, and I've brought it up with you a couple of times in these episodes. I read Bloodhunt.
Okay.
I read the whole thing, right? From beginning to end. I've read it now. Wasn't that good? No, the art was lovely, and there was some moments in it, but it just, again, it was this over the top. I think I'm repeating myself. It was this over the top vampire apocalypse, and all these people die, and then the story ends. It's like, okay, on to the next crisis. I was like, Jesus, can we take a breath? Like, this.
Right, these events tend to just set up a new status quo where that's eventually going to lead to another event, I suppose. But
Exactly, but also, like, where are the stakes? Pardon the pun, but like, where are the stakes if we don't get a chance to breathe and realize this is the human cost of this, horrific occurrence? Vampires are unleashed around the world. Well, what does that look like? What does that change about the world? Do cities work differently now? Do people have this response to the fact that everyone around them got suddenly murdered over the course of a night by an army of vampires? And then the heroes made it stop, and apparently everything's good now? I mean, I don't know if I trust that. Maybe there's going to be a spin-off tie-in comic where somebody goes into this at length. For a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and this is an event book, so it has been. I would have expected that to be in there. So this is where, just tying back to post-apocalyptic stories, I get frustrated because so much of the time it's just about showing the scale of destruction or the scale of loss, and
and that's all there is.
What's the point? That's all there is.
Yeah. So this has some more meat to it. Yeah.
Yes.
The statements on various fronts.
Have you ever been to San Francisco yourself?
Yeah. I was there a couple of times.
Right.
2011 and 2014.
Okay.
So it's been a decade now, and I think a lot has changed since the last time I was there.
And I would have thought that period would already have been, far different from the era that I would have grown up hearing about. So
it certainly wasn't 1968.
Yeah. Well, I knew folks in the early 2000s who visited from Ireland, friends of mine, and they came back and they were telling me stories that, the homelessness issue, the unhoused population, was not only very serious in terms of people living rough on the streets, but also the police were enforcing this hard line on just arresting all these homeless people, and particularly where they would go somewhere where they knew there'd be food. Like if a restaurant was giving out food, the police would just turn up at those restaurants and arrest all the people. And so again, like taking those values of love and acceptance and sharing, and then just flipping them on their head, and you've got the implied threat of violence and oppression and hardship being enforced among these people. And when I read like short fiction by Michael Shea, I never knew how to pronounce his name. Shea. So he's a sort of
I would guess Shea, probably.
Shea, yeah, I think you're right. Shea, he writes about the Heights and things like that, and he writes about this sort of bohemian 90s era and early 2000s, I think, era of San Francisco. And he sort of captures a moment, and you can sort of see in his fiction, he's writing sort of Lovecraftian stories. You can see him reacting to the land being bought up and all these companies moving in, and the sort of techno-bro ethos already emerging after the sort of the Silicon Valley boom in the 80s. And, it's just this sense of sadness. So I didn't know that about Jason moving to Portland, but I felt it when I was reading this book. I felt, this is a kiss-off. This is a middle finger raised to the digital monopoly that took over the city. Because, that the character, the Oracle, there's a sort of joke about why she's called the Oracle, but her sort of Black Mirror style rendition of her life, her relationship with her husband was digitally cultivated. Her relationship with her daughter is purely one based on surveillance. And that nasty little moment at the end with her husband, like that is just tipping it a little further into the future than what we already have. So again, sometimes satire go big or go home, but I also like when satire is just a little push. And yeah, it doesn't feel too strange to me, the sort of version of San Francisco that we see in the moment before the disaster hit.
Yeah.
It's all there.
I remember Jason telling me around the time that he moved that, because of, I think, these tech bros, all the changes they were making, like all the like places that he knew there, all the hangouts or whatever were just disappearing. It wasn't the same city anymore. So that was why he decided to get out.
Yeah, and like I'm witnessing that somewhat at the moment myself with Melbourne. COVID did a number on the city, but I have been back to the city now since the lockdown ended. I work in the city, and when I go back, the sense of Melbourne that I used to have, which has always been a very bohemian city, it has a hipster culture, which is much maligned around the rest of Australia. Australians hate Melbourne, hipsters. But anything that was interesting and sort of funky and a bit different, I feel like the air has been let out of the tire a bit. Like it's, and a lot of shops that I used to go to or places I used to check out, they're being replaced by e-cigarette stores and, franchisee newsagent Quickie Mart style shops. And it's just such a bloody shame because Melbourne is a beautiful, beautiful city with a rich history. And similar to San Francisco, it's a boom town. It's a gold rush city. And yeah, just to see the life getting sucked out of it because it's a combination of people moving away and property rates being too high for, any sort of bohemian style of culture to exist, to survive. I think I relate to what Jason's putting out there with this book. I also left. I mean, I moved to the country, as you know.
Right. Yeah. Country Victoria. Now it came back to me.
There you go. Good man.
Yeah, I've been in pretty much the same neighborhood for 35 years, more or less. I haven't moved around very much, a little bit within the Western Tokyo suburbs, but yeah, so I can't quite identify with that, but I see what you're talking about and what Jason was talking about.
There's a sort of personal motivation behind the story that I think I found charming. Yeah. Now, like, did I necessarily believe in the romance between Alex and Joanna? Maybe not. But I think in dialogue they even talk about it. They even talk about it as like, well, let's just do it. We only have a day.
Yeah, when you don't have much time left, whatever. It's sure. Not, if you mess up your life, so what? It doesn't matter anyway. So.
No consequences, But yeah, I think there was a moment where I was going, whoa, what happened? But again, that's the point. It's like, we're on fast forward. We're skipping through the flirtation stage to the consummation stage.
Coming up, Jason himself joins me to discuss the inspiration for Ghost Band and how to get a copy for yourself, and why the last third of the book was drawn by numerous artists. Then we go on to discuss perhaps the first African comic ever featured on this show, Grimm's Assistant by Mamode Ogbewele and Chigozie Amadi. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon. We really appreciate your support.
Who's Who, the definitive podcast of the DC Universe.
Spanning from the first issue of Who's Who in 1985 all the way through the loose leaf edition.
Including all the updates, the spin-offs, custom Who's Who pages for forgotten characters, and tons of in-depth character spotlights.
Entries span from the golden age of DC
and into the extreme 1990s.
Covering characters such as Superman by Kurt Swan and John Byrne.
The Justice League by Kevin Maguire.
Batman by Dick Giordano.
The New Titans by Tom Grummett.
Wonder Woman by George Perez.
The Legion of Superheroes by Keith Giffen.
The Flash by Carmine Infantino.
Lobo by Simon Bisley.
The All-Star Squadron by Jerry Ordway.
Firestorm by Al Milgrom.
Aquaman by Chuck Patton.
So many entries talking about Ian Karkull.
The Forever People again, and again, and again.
And hundreds of other characters found in Who's Who, the definitive podcast of the DC Universe.
Available wherever you find podcasts and at fireandwaterpodcast.com.
Nuclear Man, Batman, Hawkman, 2D Man, and Hour Man. Who are all these people, man? They're all part of the DC Who's Who.
All right, now Jason is here. Hello, Jason.
Greetings, Tim.
And we do have a comic to talk about, but before we do that, I wanted to ask a couple questions about Ghost Band, which you just heard me talking about with Emmet. So we'll talk a little bit about what inspired this book.
Well, so the book is about a group of people that discover the world's going to end in 24 hours, so they decide to start a band.
Mm-hmm.
And part of my inspiration for it was I started thinking, like, if George Lucas had a cell phone, would we ever have gotten Star Wars? Like, I'm teaching now, and I can't pull my kids away from their phones. And I just think, like, it's such – and I'm guilty of it, too, of all these devices, all these distractions. How much art have we lost? How many books have I not written because I was – like just staring at my phone or goofing around on the internet and killing hours of time. My most creative periods are when I put all that stuff away.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the year I wrote The Rattler, I didn't have a phone. I just got rid of the phone. I was like, this thing is killing me. It's killing my brain. I don't want to be – I don't need to be in contact. No one needs to be able to find me. I work from home. Who cares? And I feel like that was probably my greatest creative period because I wrote that book and I edited it and, published it. And I thought that I don't know that book would have existed if I had a cell phone. So, of course, cell phones are going to be the technology is going to be the end of us. That's hardly a new concept. But I wanted to take that and just say, what is the creative cost of that? And how much time do we have left? And what do we want to do with that time? Do we, making art is a very personal choice and it's not a comfortable life. You make a lot of sacrifices to make art and to, chase your muse. I always see basketball players that say, I bet on myself. And, I bet on myself too. That's why I'm declaring bankruptcy. But I don't know that I would do anything different. You do it because your life has to have a purpose, and making something and contributing to this conversation that's been going on between artists in the world. It's really the only thing I can control in my life, in my creative career. Is to put things out there and hope that they affect people and that they inspire them to make art and that we're all just working towards this tapestry of culture.
Okay. But there's also kind of a San Francisco piece to this that you wrote about a little at the end about kind of getting it out of your system after you'd lived there. And certainly there's a tech bro aspect to it also, and kind of like people telling you, we've made all this technology and it's going to make the world a utopia.
Yeah. And is that a utopia that I want to live in? Not really. So San Francisco changed a lot, and every city changes. I didn't want to be one of these people that were like, oh, this town used to be so great. I moved to Portland probably a decade ago. And when I got here, everyone told me how great it used to be. And I just think cities are a time and place in your life. And when I moved to San Francisco, it was just filled with creative people. Everyone was an artist or in a band or a painter or a sculptor. And we would throw these parties and just show everyone's art. And I would throw on art shows, partly to promote my books, but to promote my friends. And then all those people that I knew, that community that I had, they just slowly got pushed out, and they were replaced with people that didn't make things, people that, coders and engineers and software people and Google buses. And, you overhear things on the street in cities. You can kind of get a feel for cities. And what I was overhearing in the beginning was, I'm doing this, I'm making that, or my band's playing. And then when I was ready to move out of the city, it was people were talking, like young kids are talking about their 401k. You have like 22-year-old kids making way too much money, dressed really poorly. They have a lot of money, but no fashion sense. And I just thought, it's time for me to let go. The city's not for me anymore. I'm not going to complain. I had a great time. It made me who I am, but it's time to give it to someone else and move on. So yeah, it is partly a love letter to the creative communities that a creative community that no longer exists.
Mm-hmm. Now, clearly, from reading this book, I could see that about 2/3 of the way through, something happened with your artist, and you had to hit the bat phone and call as many other superheroes as you could to finish it up. What happened exactly?
My artist just decided they didn't want to be a comic book artist.
Okay.
Like page 52, I broke them. I ruined them. I think you start a project, and in the dead center of any project, especially a book that's 111 pages, you get in the dead center of a project, and you're the furthest away from the beginning. You're the furthest away from the end. It's like being at sea, like you're in the middle of the ocean and you can't see land on either side. And that's usually when projects slow down. And this person just decided, I don't want to do this anymore. And I said, okay, fair enough. I don't want to force someone to do it. I can't force someone to do it. So I just, and there were a bunch of delays, and I had to pick up the pace of this book pretty quickly to get it out to backers. So I reached out to, because it's a San Francisco book, I just reached out to artists from the Bay Area. I figured if I was going to have guest artists, it should have a meaning for it. So I got Justin Greenwood, Paige Braddock, my friend John Hebing, Peter Sakash, just a slew of people, Matt Harding, that Bay Area artists, many who don't live in the Bay Area anymore. Many of them were also pushed out of the Bay Area. So I wanted it to mean something to have those people there. So yeah, it becomes a jam book towards the end. And what I did is I had each guest artist take a scene. So hopefully it wasn't like jarring in the middle of a scene. Just to have that continuity. Rasan Ikadel too. I was lucky enough to get Rasan in there.
Are there still copies of this available, or can people buy it digitally? Where would people look to get this book?
Just off camera, I have 500 copies behind me in my office. Okay. So yes, act fast, readers. You can get a copy from me at politestrangers.com. Many of my books, I have a store there where I sell many of my books. It's in local shops. I don't have it anywhere online. I've been slow to do that, although we are going to be reviewing a comic from Global Comics, which is something that I want to explore in the future.
Yeah, now this site, switching gears here, thank you, Jason.
Sure.
This site, globalcomics.com, which is kind of weird because when this podcast started, our site was globalcomics.org, I think. It's been such a long time ago now that I got the deconstructingcomics.com domain. But that kind of like, oh, gee, that's interesting. Anyway, this comic. So I think this is the first time we've ever taken requests on the show. Through Facebook, I got this request from Juliana Izegbe, apparently African name, and Juliana said, please, can you do a review of the triple award-winning Grimm's Assistant one-shot comic? So, Juliana, here's your long-distance dedication. So, she didn't actually include a link to it, but I found it easily enough on this Global Comics site. Just a digital version of the comic for free, and a couple other comics that are the same thing in other languages. I have no idea what languages these are. African languages, I assume. Now, explaining what happened in this comic, the thing that bothered me about this comic was that I felt like the writer didn't quite give us enough information. there was a lot about it that I figured out many pages after it should have been explained by the writer. So, for example, we start out at this mansion. And by the way, I really liked the drawing of this mansion. And I don't know, the way that it put it against a black background, it really pops. Mm-hmm. I like this. And I should mention that the illustrator is Chigozie Amadi, and the writer and colorist is Mamode Ogbewele. Sorry, I'm butchering these names. But we see this house, and there are a couple people inside talking, and one of them is identified as Miss Chinwe, and the other one has no name. And then his daughter comes in. I believe her name is Nina, we find out at some point. And then there are these, like, commandos who suddenly attack the house. There were guards outside that they gas, and they get into the house, and then some kind of maybe superhero-y person confronts them, but the scene doesn't explain why these people are attacking this house. We do find out that the daughter is supposed to testify against her father's former employer. Doesn't explain why until later. So I was a little lost starting out this comic.
Yeah, they set it up on page 1 that the daughter's testifying. It's a kind of a pretty rote crime setup. The daughter's going to testify. He's obviously a big bad dude with connections. This team is coming in to ostensibly kill the little girl, so she can't testify.
Yeah, and that was explained a little later than it should have been, too, I thought.
I thought it was on the first page.
That they were trying to kill her? I didn't understand why they were attacking this house.
Oh, I just figured, yeah, he doesn't hold your hand, but it is, obviously it's a big case. They're scared. If the cops are there to protect her, there's clearly a threat. So I followed that. What I didn't follow was the relationship between the earthly sort of apprentice assistant to Grimm's assistant, the assistant to Death.
Yeah,
what their relationship is, what their connection is, and how their relationship works is ill-defined. Actually, it's not defined at all.
Right.
We're just kind of thrown into it, and we're like, wait, what is happening? I don't understand. Some sort of like exposition on how their relationship works. Like just a panel or two would have really helped me, because I really wasn't sure what. I had to read it twice because I really wasn't sure what I was looking at.
Right. Well, eventually I figured out. So there's this guy Nosa, who is a university student, and this is taking place in Nigeria, and so but there's this guy who appears to, which I only figured out from the description on globalcomics.com, not in the comic itself, that Grimm is the Grim Reaper. And yeah, this guy is his assistant, as the title says. But yeah, we don't really know how they got hooked up, where this relationship came from. Why is he an apprentice Grim Reaper? But he's sent into the house to protect the girl and keep these commando people from murdering her, and he succeeds at that. Spoiler alert. And then there's a lot of philosophizing about death in the comic, in Nosa's university philosophy class. And then at the end of the comic, when the Grim Reaper says, no matter how much we want to intervene in respect of death, we can't. Death can't stop death. Because they've saved Nina, but like there's some other identical situation elsewhere in the world where a girl named Nina testified against her mother's murderer. That was what the employer did. Why? We don't know.
No, it's the same girl. It's the same girl from the first scene. They save her from the commandos, and then she testifies. And then, this is also a head scratcher, this 10-year-old girl dies of a heart attack on the steps after testifying.
Okay, I took it to be in another part of the world because now we've got a Mr. Fernandez, and that doesn't seem like an African name. Yeah, I don't know. It was kind of confusing to me. I mean, it's all the same names. Yeah, Mr. Plenty Money, who's the boss, and Nina.
Yeah, they sort of throw in the murder of Nina's mother, and I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, that could have been explained a lot sooner.
Yeah, that's... So the set, yeah, it is the young girl from the first scene. She's going to testify. The commandos try to kill her. This avenging spirit, I'm sorry, it's actually death, repels them. The girl gets to testify, but because it's almost like a Final Destination thing, you can't cheat death. Mm-hmm. Because that girl was supposed to die, she still dies. It just happens. She just dies of a heart attack.
Yeah, well, I guess
which is a strange. It's a strange way to kill a 10-year-old.
It makes more sense if it is the same set of characters. I took the Fernandez, made me think it was in the Hispanic world somewhere, but yeah, I mean maybe a piano should have fallen on her or something,
or hit by a car.
Yeah,
I don't know how many 10-year-olds die in heart attacks. I mean, I'm sure it could happen, but it was a record scratch moment for me. Like heart, like
I guess she's been smoking too much.
I mean, a congenital heart thing they didn't know about. Yeah, piano falling. Just the stress of being a 10-year-old. I mean, she did testify in court. I don't know. I don't want to nit that pick. That's just my lesser problem. I like the art style. Mm-hmm. It's simple. It's effective. It's great use of blacks and whites. I thought you talked about on the first page.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of yellow and red highlighting, but a lot of it's just black and white.
It's black and white with some yellow, with the yellow spot colors, and some red for dialogue and sound effects. I suspect, Tim, that there might be some cultural parts of this story that we're just not picking up.
It could be.
Yeah. Also, some of the language, I imagine this has been translated, but there are some uses of language that kind of threw me off. I can't tell if it's poetic or if it's a mistranslation, but he says, my little girl saw her mother turn into money.
Yeah, that was a little puzzling. But was there like I suppose Mr. Plenty Money paid people, and so paid people to kill her, and so that was what he meant, maybe?
I think that's a mistranslation. I bet you my little girl saw her mother turn into ash or turned into something. That makes no sense. And there were a couple of phrases where I was like, this could just be like a regional difference. This could be like a phrase I'm not familiar with, or it just could be, the translation is a little wonky. There's also a scene where our student is in the classroom and he's leaving the classroom. And then there's a panel where he's like bent over in the hallway as if he's just been punched in the face. And his friend is behind him with his hand cocked. But the text does not relay that as an action that happened. They're friendly. They're having a friendly conversation. But he's holding his face as if he's just been punched. Do you see that?
Oh, where he says, dude, it's philosophy?
Yeah, right? He's bent over holding his face.
Yeah, I don't know what that pose is about. And yeah, the other guy has his fists up like he's just... But then they give each other a fist bump in the next panel.
Yeah, so, they're pals.
Yeah, so I don't know what's going... Maybe his friend accidentally bumped his face instead of his fist.
I don't know. It took me out a little bit. I was like, that is not the action in the panel is not matching the scene around it or the dialogue. I also I'm a sucker for cross hatching. There's some really nice cross hatching in this book to fill the backgrounds. There's not a lot of backgrounds, I should say. So if you can't put a background, cross hatching works just as well for me.
Oh yeah, I see it here. I mean, aside from the parts that were a little hard to figure out. I mean, I thought the story was okay, and yeah, I like the art. I never got lost in what was happening other than, yeah, I see the problem with that one panel. But it wasn't like, what's going on in this panel? That never happened. So, yeah, basically I liked this, but it needed some improvement in certain ways.
Just the setup. What is the relationship of the main character to death, to Grimm? What is their setup? Some sort of like modus operandi. There's a lot of action in this book, but I would have liked a little bit more exposition and a little bit more setup. Yeah. That would get me coming back. So hopefully that's in issue 2.
Yeah, I wonder if like I mentioned, there are other digital books on this page, but they're just the same thing in a different language. I wonder if there's going to be any more of this series. Maybe an origin story?
Yeah, nice. I mean, I feel like this should have been the origin story. But, obviously this creator has some philosophical leanings based on their the essay at the end that they included, the epilogue that they wrote for themselves. So I applaud anyone who makes a comic book. It's not easy to do all this, especially on your own, and it clearly meant a lot to them. So I think, and I'll be honest, I don't see I'm not familiar with a lot of comic books coming out of Africa, so I was sort of excited to see a different set of characters, a different location, a different culture being explored. So that was fun. I mean, I
assume that there are a lot of people making comics in Africa, but yeah, not many of them get in front of me. So yeah. Juliana, thank you for pointing this out to us.
Yeah. No, I'm glad I read it. It's an above average indie comic, self-produced, and he got it done, and he got it out in the world, and people are reading it and discovering it and putting it in front of us. So well done. Yeah, I'm not going to maul your name, but well done. Right. I'm sorry. I am a New Yorker, and we mispronounce everything, and I just.
Okay, but
where can people find this? Global Comics with an X.com?
I'll link to it in the show notes, yes.
Grimm's Assistant, yeah.
Yeah, although, as I proved myself, a quick Google will also find it. It's not hard to find.
Interesting. So, yeah, I want to know. Yeah. I want to know how he became Grimm's assistant. I want to know what their relationship is. I think that's the most interesting part of this that is really not touched upon. So, yeah, I would come back for another one.
Yeah, we want to see the second issue. The links to buy Ghost Band and to read Grimm's Assistant for free are in the show notes. Thanks to our patrons for supporting Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and our other podcasts. To join them, go to patreon.com/deconcomics. Patrons get access to podcasts about the early years of The Amazing Spider-Man, Jim Starlin's run on Captain Marvel, and more. Coming soon, we wrap up the Starlin podcast as Kumar, Emmet, Patrick, and I dig into the 1982 graphic novel, The Death of Captain Marvel. But you can only hear that if you pledge at least $4 a month. That's patreon.com/deconcomics. Are you making a comic? Send it to us and we'll do a Critiquing Comics episode about it. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. Next week, Kumar and I discuss the latest from two of our indie comics favorites. We'll be looking at The Re-Up issues 3 through 6 from Chad Bilyeu, a.k.a. Chad in Amsterdam. His story about the time 20 years ago when he was selling marijuana proves to have much more emotional resonance than expected. We'll also look at David Dye's Amazing Tales, issues 6 through 8, as his material ranges from Beowulf to sci-fi to creepy tales. That's next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.